Hello, and welcome to today's SFP webinar on PE licensure, how and why. This is Victoria Valentine, SFP Director of Professional Qualifications, and I'm going to be moderating today's session. Before we get started, let's go over some information in regards to webinar logistics. First of all, participants will receive a certificate of attendance for 1 PDH. To receive a certificate, you must stay online for the entire webinar. Certificates will be sent out via email in about a week. Also, we do not provide copies. Okay. So we will be posting a video of this presentation of SFP's YouTube channel and website in the next week. Additionally, you can ask our speaker questions by writing it in the webinar dashboard. You may ask a question at any time. However, we will be addressing all questions at the end of the session. And today's speaker is Kevin Black. Kevin graduated from WPI in 2009 with a bachelor's in chemical engineering, and then in 2011 with a master's in fire protection engineering. He spent 3 years with FM Global in the approvals laboratory, where he tested and approved foam suppression systems, sprinkler systems, and associated fire protection equipment. After working at FM Global, Kevin moved into a fire engineer consulting role with Costantini Associates in New York City. Was there for about 4 years, focusing on building code consulting for business and healthcare occupancies, conducting fire modeling, on-site inspections, and fire resistance rated steel, fireproofing, and healthcare statement of conditions. Just recently, in February of 2020, Kevin started as a fire engineer for SGH and currently focuses on building and fire code consulting reports, field surveys, and fire modeling. And he has also served for his SFP New York Metro chapter board as a director. So I'm going to welcome Kevin and turn this over to you for our presentation.
Great, thank you, Vicki. And thank you everybody for joining. Vicki, let me know if you can't hear me at any point or if the sound kind of cuts out.
Will do.
Okay, so for the agenda today, first off, why get your PE? Fundamentals of engineering exam. PE required credentials, how to apply for the PE, test preparation and test day, and then what to do after the exam. So why become a professional engineer? So this information is actually from professional licensing boards, but essentially being a PE is showing evidence that an engineer is competent enough to practice without adversely affecting the health, safety, or welfare of the public. So it's basically the top tier of our profession, and it's kind of showing that you're able to do your job without negatively affecting the public. Another good reason is recognition of competent work, lifelong career paths, career development, financial incentives, and higher salaries. So if you've ever gotten the SFPE documentation on salaries, it kind of shows PE versus non-PE and how the salaries are higher for somebody who is a licensed engineer. And then, of course, the prestige that comes with being a licensed engineer. So the first step is Fundamentals of Engineering exam. So it's a 6-hour computer-based exam offered year-round at NCES approved test centers. So this is a 110 multiple choice questions exam, and then they have also alternative type items. So if you've already taken this, great. Some of the newer computer-based exams have multiple choice options. So now this is standard. So you have regular multiple choice, but then you have multiple correct options, point and click, drag and drop, and fill in the blanks. So these are new style of questions to help make it a little bit more diverse. So the exam covers engineering fundamentals such as math, probability and statistics, ethics, engineering economics, as well as questions specific to your specialty. So you can register specific for mechanical, chemical, electrical, computer, environment, etc. But for somebody who has fire protection engineering as an undergrad, you might want to go into general engineering. There's a bunch of different choices there that you can look into. The registration is directly through NCES, and then passing the FE is required to apply for the PE. So the first step here is really the fundamentals of engineering, and you kind of have to get through that prior to applying for the PE. So If you haven't done this yet, you should certainly look into it. In my opinion, it's much easier to do the sooner you are to graduation. If you wait a long time, a lot of the topics that are covered on the exam are something that you took as a sophomore or a junior in college. So it starts to get more challenging the longer you wait, and you'll have to try to relearn some of that information. For the PE exam, these are the required credentials. Again, we said successfully passing the FE exam. Check your state for specific application deadlines. So I work in New York. New York is a little bit tricky because the deadline is May 1st. So it actually requires you almost 5 years before you can actually apply for the PE exam. Of course, it varies by state and depends on a few factors. One of them is work experience. So typically a minimum of 4 years of work experience is required, depending on your state. And then there's a few different degrees. So associate's, bachelor, master's, PhD. And then there's a bit of a difference between engineering and engineering technology degree. So if you have an engineering technology degree, you'll have to check with your state to see if they consider that a fully accredited degree that allows you to apply for the PE with that 4 years of work experience. And then ABET accredited school. So if you went to WPI or Maryland, that's an ABET accredited school. You'd have to check with your engineering program to find out if you were ABET accredited. And then I kind of give an example here of New York State. Of course, I want to remind you to check in with your state because every state is different. But for an example, Bachelor's of Science in engineering from an ABET accredited school is going to give you 8 credits. And then New York State's going to require a total of 12 education experience credits. So if you have a master's, that's an extra credit, and then each year of work experience is another credit on top of that. So essentially, if you have a bachelor's degree from an ABET accredited school, and then you work for 4 years, that's going to give you your 12 credits, and then you can apply once you have that. Internships do not count towards experience, and then additional requirements can be found below, specific to New York State. So I just wanted to kind of show an image. I checked a couple of states. I work in New York. I'm also licensed in Massachusetts and Connecticut. Those all require a 4-year degree and then 4 years of work experience, but the deadlines for your application are different and the application requirements are different. I also looked up Illinois, Florida. Those are both 4 years of work experience with your ABET degree. I looked up Texas. Texas is 4-year ABET degree, 4 years of work, but then you also have to take a separate Texas ethics exam. California, for example, is a 4-year ABET degree and then only 2 years of work. So I have actually had some colleagues fly to California and sit for the PE because they can get licensed there sooner. And then once they have the appropriate experience, they've actually transferred their license to New York and kind of applied for licensure that way. So obviously I don't cover all states here. Just check with your state licensing boards. A lot of the websites are pretty self-explanatory and some of them have really good graphics or charts to help you kind of understand what you need to do to apply. Also, feel free to reach out to your states. A lot of these state boards are just regular people, and you can ask them questions if you're not sure of something. They're usually pretty good to work with. So work experience and project examples. So some of your states will require you to provide a number of project examples in order to apply for the PE. So request licensed professional engineers to recommend you. So this is typically your supervisor, but it's not required. When I applied, I think I had to have 4 or 5 or 6 references, and I made sure that those people were PEs just to kind of show these are people that I've worked with that can recommend my work. When you're talking about your project experience, use strong language. So led a project, you completed something specific, you designed a system, you specified sprinklers, you did a hydraulic calculation, that sort of thing. Refer to codes or industry standards showing compliant design. So they want to make sure that you have designed a sprinkler system to NFPA 13, not just that you have done a design per some textbook or some other reference that you've gotten from your internal job. Also be aware of your job title. So you can't legally be an engineer in 38 states until you are licensed. And they kind of have different legal requirements on the title. So I have had some colleagues that have had engineer in their title and they email the state board. The state doesn't really take it that lightly because this is a legal designation. And then if you have to provide project experience, try to provide 3 to 5 long-term projects, something that's 6 months to a year, that shows diversity in the project types and responsibilities. So I'm a code consultant. It's been relatively easy to show a lot of diversity in the work that I do. But even if you're strictly a sprinkler designer, that's fine, but try to show different buildings that you've done sprinkler design in, right? Like something like a sprawling low-rise building or high-rise residential, high-rise business, assembly spaces, etc. And again, just check with your state to find out what those guidelines are. So exam costs, a lot of this can add up and it's kind of none of the costs individually. Sometimes they don't seem that high, but when you add them all up, it can certainly get expensive. So FE exam fee is $175 directly through NCES. Again, I recommend starting that application process and signing up now. PE state fees vary. So New York is $377, but it's going to be different throughout. And then the exam cost through NCES is $375. That's going to be consistent throughout the country. So basically you have to pay your state for all of the paperwork and the licensing, and then you have to pay NCES to actually take the exam. You might have to pay for books and reference materials. Of course, you can try to borrow these from somebody you work with, or if you bought them for school, you can keep those and kind of review those reference materials. Classes, so if you take the SFPE exam prep review class, that has a cost to it. Time off to study, that's something that you might have to consider or factor in that cost. And then day of exam and any sort of reimbursements related to that. Maybe if the test center is not near you or if you have to pay for parking, anything like that. So one of my recommendations is to ask your company. A lot of them have lucrative policies in place to kind of help you with some of these costs, especially if somebody is requiring you for your job to be a licensed professional engineer. Your company should be picking up some of these costs. So it's definitely something to ask before you start applying and before you get involved in the process to find out what your company policy is. Prep course and study time. So big recommendations, study together. A lot of times there might be something that you don't understand well that somebody else does, and sometimes explaining how something works is the best way to learn it fully. So your coworkers or industry colleagues will be taking the same prep course. Obviously, you can watch classes together at work or at school or at home, or you can kind of talk about the problems that were covered in the class. Try to study the same way you're going to take the exam. So find a quiet space, have the reference nearby that you're permitted to use, and then go to the SFPE website, purchase reference materials. So I have a link to a website here, but essentially SFPE does have the reference materials that you can actually utilize. And then use your study materials in your daily job as applicable to get used to where the information is located in your reference. Review and utilize exam specifications, and then practice exams are likely scarce, so use them wisely. I recommend maybe not using these until you've gotten towards the end of your study period. And then NCES does have a new sample exam for fire protection. So in the handouts link in the GoToWebinar, you can kind of see that we have attached a handout, and that's going to be for the PE Fire October 2020 exam. So the SFPE prep course. So I recommend taking the course. I did, it was helpful. The course is being completely revised for this year, so that's good. There'll be fresh information based on the revised test specification. So the course reviews each topic that the exam will cover. There's 14 1.5-hour classes that start July 14th. And I believe there's going to be 2 sessions. I think it's on Tuesdays and Thursdays. One of them is afternoon and one of them is evening. And then that kind of helps align with what your work or home schedule might be. Classes are taught by licensed professionals. And also if you register early, instructors are actually having office hours starting May 21st. So if you register, I think this week, then you'll get access to the professors who are going to teach the classes. And if you end up starting to study earlier for the PE, then you'll be able to work with these professors a little bit earlier. And then I also provided the link on how to register. So the exam is closed book, which this is a change for anybody who's taken the pencil and paper exam. The electronic exam is closed book. You must log into my NCES account to access your resources, including the PE Fire Protection Reference Handbook. It's an electronic PDF, so you'll use it to do all the problems. Know where your information is located. So of course you can use the search function to find your information. But if you get to the day of the exam and you try to search something like fire, you're going to have some difficulty finding the info you need. So make sure that you're using this booklet throughout the study period to be familiar with all the info. So my recommendation is about 3 months. So there's 12 topics, go through one per week. So you can certainly follow what the SFB course kind of does and which topics they cover week by week. And that's when you'll spend your time studying that topic. I recommend 10 to 15 hours a week. And then maybe 1 month away from the exam, you'll be a little bit higher, 15 to 30 hours per week. You might be a little anxious about some of the things you're not that familiar with yet. So it's likely that you're going to want to increase study time. Maybe before you were just doing evenings and now you'll be doing weekends as well. 2 weeks before, I recommend a practice exam with realistic conditions, morning and afternoon sessions, touch up on any specific topics. And then a week before, or maybe 2 days before, I recommend taking a break. Try to exercise or, watch movies or go to dinner or something. Just try to clear your mind so that you're much more focused for the actual exam. So this is an example of the exam topics. This is certainly light. So if you look at the exam specifications, it'll help you out a little bit more. But there's fire protection analysis, fire dynamics fundamentals, active and passive systems. So this is where your water-based fire protection systems are going to be. If you are predominantly a sprinkler designer, the water-based fire protection systems is actually a pretty small portion of the exam. And then egress and occupant movement. So taking the exam. The exam is a 8.5-hour computer-based exam with a 50-minute lunch break. So the appointment that you'll be making is actually 9.5 hours. So that's a long period of time. It is to make sure that we have enough time to actually take the exam and then fit in your lunch break. And then also there's some administration things at the beginning of the exam. It's an 85-question exam split between morning and afternoon. Again, there are multiple choice answers and alternative type items. So multiple correct options, point and click, drag and drop, fill in the blank. Questions are not meant to trick you. And then incorrect questions are meant to be distractors. So each question stands alone. There won't be a scenario that 3 questions relate where, question 18, the answer to that will be required for question 19. There won't be anything that's, chained together like that. Answer all questions, so it's positive scoring only. Some types of exams, for getting something, for getting something wrong, you're going to get negative points, and then for not answering, you might get negative points, but this is only positive scoring, so make sure you answer every question, even if you have to take a guess. I recommend bringing your own lunch. You have, some difficulty knowing what will happen the day of, and if you'll actually be able to leave and find somewhere to get lunch. And then review the NCES examinee guide. So this is a guide that NCES puts out to kind of help you with questions leading up to the exam, day of the exam, after the exam, what to expect. It's pretty helpful. It's a little bit long, but it certainly will answer a lot of your questions if you're feeling anxious about anything or you need more information. So there's an alternative item type video for NCES. You can either check their YouTube channel or you can go to the link below. So this is going to give you kind of examples. It's a short video, 2 or 3 minutes, and it just kind of gives you examples of what those other alternative type exam questions look like. So this is helpful because there's not a lot of other electronic exams that people have taken before. So this kind of helps set your mind on what type of questions they might be asking and how to actually complete those answers. Okay, so I have an example question to kind of give you an idea of how the PE will be set up. Vicki, if you could launch the poll.
Oh, wait, there we go.
Okay, so I'll give you a minute or two to fill this in, but basically this is a good example, especially if it was a multiple choice type of question. So they're going to give you 3 values. All of these values, the question is the PE exam application fee in New York State is, and there's going to be 4 values. So something that they won't do, question D, while it may be applicable, or sorry, answer D, while it may be applicable, is not a realistic answer for this question. So that's something that just looking at this question, you can cross that out, but this is not really how the PE will be. They will have 4 realistic answers. The other numbers we talked about a few slides ago, so it's very easy to pick the wrong number with a gut reaction. So basically just take a few seconds, read through the answers, realize that they're all possible choices, and that it's not designed to trick you, but it's designed to make sure you're answering the question appropriately.
All right, so I will close the poll. Just so you know, there are 6% who said all my blood, sweat, and tears.
It's realistic.
And you had 46% say 377, 35% at 375, and 14% at 175.
Okay, I believe it was 377. 175 is for the FE exam. 375 is the cost through NCES to sit for the PE exam. Thank you all for taking the poll. Next, I have pass and fail rates. So this is just to give you an idea of the actual volume. So we have the fire protection exam from 2017 and 2019. As a reminder, these were pencil and paper exams. So first-time test takers, we had about 200 each of those years. And the pass rate is 55% for 2019, 60% for 2017. And then we also have repeat takers, so somebody who has taken the exam again. Those pass rates are a little bit lower. So typically, it's a 55 to 60% pass rate for first-time test takers. And then the SFPE course registrants, the pass rate is approximately 75%. So another kind of good reason to be taking this SFPE course is that the pass rate percentage is a little bit higher. These are self-reported, so the results might be a little bit skewed, but I would say that in general, somebody who is taking the SFPE prep course is going to have a better idea of what's on the exam, what types of questions they're going to ask, and just better general knowledge of the topics on the exam. So after the exam is complete, it's over, just take a breath, try to relax, try not to think about the questions that are haunting you too much. It takes about 6 to 8 weeks to get your results for a few reasons. Exams are taken by subject matter experts, so they actually call in subject matter experts to go through the questions and see if anything is specifically confusing or if they're getting the right answers. Questions with multiple correct answers or questions that may have been confusing will be thrown out. So back when there were only multiple choice answers, if for some reason B and C were both correct answers, those types of questions would be thrown out. And then your results will be provided electronically. My recommendation is after it's all over to go to your favorite bar or theme park to celebrate as applicable. Of course, we have to wait for some of those things to open back up. But it will take a while to get your results. NCES and SFPE are trying to work to make that a little bit faster so that the exam can be offered more often, but that's just kind of how this works for now. Once you're licensed, what actually changes? So some companies have significant financial incentives. So some companies are either going to give you a raise or a bonus upon completion. Obviously, check with your company. You're going to have a lot more respect. Update your email signature, and people will see that you're licensed. You'll get a lot of congratulations, that type of thing. People will trust your judgment more. So when they see who's responding to their emails or what's on your business card, people will be more familiar with what a PE means, and that'll be something that they look for. Provide your license to your employer so that they can update appropriate documents. For me at SGH, all of their email signature is all auto-generated, so you have to make sure that you notify HR or the marketing team that you have your license. And then also on proposals, they're going to give out that information to say that I'm a licensed engineer. Of course, depending on the work that you're doing, you have to be licensed in the appropriate state. You're going to update email signatures, business cards, of course, any of the monogrammed sweaters that you have. And then on a periodic basis, you'll need to renew your license. Review your state requirements regarding renewal. I would say that most states are either on a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year cycle where every so often you have to renew your license and you have to make sure you're getting your CEUs, basically continuing education, to show that you're still learning, even though you're a licensed engineer. And then what will you actually stamp? So of course it depends on your job, but drawings, letter reports, engineering judgments. There might be conflicts of interest, so check with your firm. Some firms will not allow you to practice as a licensed engineer for anything outside of your firm, so just check with that. There's of course liability concerns for that, so if you're working on the side for somebody else that's not your firm, you might not be appropriately insured against any liability issues. And then there's ethics, practicing within your discipline and expertise. So even though I'm a licensed fire protection engineer, I don't do a lot of fire alarm design, so I would not be apt to stamp fire alarm design that I wasn't familiar with or that somebody else didn't check first. So just make sure you're practicing within your discipline. And that's all I have. We can open it up for questions now.
All right. So I do have some questions that came in.
Great.
We'll just start at the beginning. So one of them, and I think this is a really good discussion point, is do you need to have a degree in fire protection engineering to get your PE as an FPE, or will any engineering do?
That's a great question, Vicki. I think it doesn't matter. I can apply as long as I have the experience and the degree from an ABET accredited university or appropriate.
Yeah, and I think that goes for pretty much most engineering. It's not just fire protection, that you can, whether or not you get through the material shows your expertise in that particular subject.
Yeah, and I think obviously if you have 4 years of experience in fire protection, then that's going to be something that's a lot more appropriate for you to apply for as opposed to like electrical engineering PE.
Right. How many states actually acknowledge FPE as an option? And Kevin, I can actually answer that. And it's we do have a dashboard on the SFPE website that shows where all of the states stand. And fire protection engineering is recognized. Well, on a technicality in all 50, Hawaii is still processing some legislation, and this is tied in with a bill of sorts that has a lot of other things tied to it. So it's kind of been stuck in legislation for years. So when you talk to like their government officials, they all recognize that that needs to be processed. It just hasn't ever made it out the other side of their legislative body yet. And then the other one that we're working on is Rhode Island accepts fire protection as comedy and recognizes it as its own field, but they haven't previously allowed the test. And that change we think is actually coming with the computer-based options, in that there's really no additional steps or anything that they would have to do since everything is just done through the computer centers. So other than that, the other 48 are solid.
Vicki, are there actual, so I know like New York, it doesn't say PE in fire protection, it just says like professional engineer, whereas I know that California, the stamps actually say, I think they say fire protection engineering or something like that. Do you have any data on that?
Totally state dependent, and I don't have the specifics as to how
Okay.
many states just recognize engineers as a whole and how
Mhm.
many call out all of the disciplines, because it wouldn't just be fire in that case.
Of course.
It would be more specific with all of them.
Yep.
So somebody says that they did submit their application and listed their title as fire protection engineer, and were there any recommendations as to how to handle this now?
I don't have any recommendations. I would just say let it ride. I don't think that they would reject your application because of your title, but I wouldn't go back and update anything. Vicki, I don't know if you have any other experience.
You know, I don't. I haven't had anybody, I mean, fabulous advice, and I've heard it a lot more in the field of somebody calling themselves an engineer without a license. I hadn't necessarily personally given a lot of thought to the state board until you and I started talking about it in this arena.
Yeah, I've certainly heard it more in practicing as opposed to like an application. I've heard it mostly with like emails. If people email on a question, the state comes back and says, I looked up your license and I couldn't find it. It doesn't seem like you're a licensed engineer, which should be somewhat obvious to the state because they're asking about applying for licensure. But I think it's just something to be cautious of. I don't think that you should contact the state board and try to remedy that.
Okay. All right, let's see here. That puts us, somebody asked about dual licensure. So they have a PE in electrical, been doing fire alarm for 30 years, and Florida's now recognizing fire protection as a separate discipline. Do you have to go back and pass the FPE? I'll jump in here too. Most states, when they make a change like that, do a few things. One of them is they usually have some allowance for grandfathering, especially because they don't usually anticipate that people who have been in the industry for 20, 30, 40 years are going back to take this type of exam. The other is you're going to have to check with each individual state because, as Kevin mentioned, some recognize just PE and some are very specific with disciplines and who can do what. I know Florida sometimes can be very specific, but I would be extremely surprised. I apologize, I don't have firsthand information on this, but I'd be really surprised if there isn't some sort of grandfather clause that allows for it. What are the materials in the reference handbook? And as part of that, Kevin, I think we mentioned a few different ones. So if you could just kind of do a quick recap on the different materials that you put out there.
Sure. So there's a few different things. That's the exam. Vicki, what we attached is
we attached the specification.
Exam spec.
Right.
Okay. And then the book.
So there's a reference manual from NCAAS, and that's the one you're permitted in the test. That's the reference handbook. And then there's also I don't know if it has a new title yet, but it used to be called a reference manual anyways. I'm not sure what this current one says. It probably says the same thing, from SFPE, which is a study guide. So I just don't want there to be confusion between the two.
Right. So there's the SFPE study guide, which is just assisting you in the topics that you should be familiar with, whereas the NCEES, Vicki, what are they calling it?
The Fire Protection Reference Handbook.
Yep. And then that's the electronic resource that I can access before the exam. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay.
And you access it through My NCES, which is completely free of charge, but you do have to basically fill in your information and get into the portal in order to access it.
Right, which is fine because you'll need My NCES as a licensed engineer, and you'll need it probably to apply for the exam as well.
Yes. All right, we have gotten a bunch, I think I'm up to 5 now that have come in asking if you don't live in the US, can you still apply for a PE?
I think the answer is yes.
Absolutely. So there's a couple of different avenues. One, NCAAS does offer exams outside of the US. It is country specific, but if you go to their website, all right, I'm challenging my brain here, but I believe it's like 30 countries or so, give or take, that they offer the exams in, depending on who they have agreements with. So there may be the opportunity to take it where you are. There's also, if you wanted to work with one of the state boards or your company or lots of other avenues that you can take it within the United States as well. But there are those types of options set up. But NCAAS is the best source if you are international for determining what your easiest path is. Let's see. So somebody was asking about the SFP review course. It is a brand new course this year. So we used to partner with another organization, and it has come completely in-house. So our Committee on Professional Development has groups all put together. There's a slew of instructors lined up for the summer courses, and I know they've all been diligently working on it. So I cannot stress enough that this is absolutely 100% brand new for 2020. Okay, so here's one that asks about waiving the FEEIT exam with experience. I don't know, do you have knowledge on that, Kevin? I have a little bit, but.
So I think that that's state specific. I know that I had a few colleagues that said, I'm applying for the exam, it looks like the FE isn't required. And it was somebody who had already taken the FE, and when he sent his email to the state board in New York, they had said that it wasn't required if he had enough experience, but it was a little confusing. The way just the state replied made it sound like he didn't need to take it because he had already taken it. Nikki, I don't know if you have any additional info.
Yeah, so I've seen, I want to say, let's see, I think I was looking at South Carolina the other day. And I know I was looking at another state, and I've seen that usually you can exclude it with a significant amount of experience, and it's usually around 20 years before you can exempt from taking the exam.
Yeah, that's true even in California as well. If you have 20 years experience, they do allow you to waive it as long as you can document that.
Great, thanks. I will, just so the audience is aware, that's Himanshu. He was on our review group, and he's part of the exam development committee. So he was working with us, which is how he's on the organizer side of the presentation with us. But we appreciate your contribution. I just didn't want the audience to be confused at the new voice.
When I looked through these state websites that I actually looked at, there wasn't anything that was extremely clear to me that made it seem like you could easily bypass the FE for somebody who was just looking for, 4 years experience or anything like that. It didn't seem clear to me, whereas something like having your master's degree can be used in replace of 1 year work experience. That was very clear to me on these websites, but being able to skip the FE didn't seem like it was something too clear.
Yeah, and Kevin, the only places I've seen it in have been those long-term experience components. That's my experience, but I absolutely agree wholeheartedly. Always check with your own state board. There is a question, does it have to be an engineering degree from the United States, or would anywhere in the world work? And with that, I can add, there's a couple of levels. There's ABET accredited universities around the world, which is of course a very simple, clean thing that most of the boards accept is they're always looking for that ABET accreditation. ABET also has international partners that accredit programs, so there's agreements in there that would just cover that. And there's an evaluation service. So if you don't happen to have a degree from one of those programs, there is an education evaluation service. It's recommended right through the NCAA's website so that they can accept degrees from elsewhere, recognizing you can get just as good of an education around the world. As more states are requiring CEUs and PhDs, some states are now requiring that the class provider be registered with the state. And is SFP currently accepted? And they're using New York as an example. So this is a slight deviation because usually when you're just going for the PE, and a lot of times that first license period, they also kind of give you a little bit of a grace on your CEU requirements. But all states do have requirements and all states have their own what they will accept. So SFP is working on some higher level items, such as becoming IASET accredited, which is accepted even in New York State. I used to live in New York myself, so I have some experience with what they look for. Otherwise, I'm trying to think, I know Florida has some special requirements and so does Wisconsin. But for the most part, our local chapters also help to make sure that we go through the right processes and get the accreditations we need. Let's see, some of these are repeating the topic, so I'm just trying to make sure that we get to other ideas. Is there separate for electrical, meaning like fire alarms and stuff, and mechanical being more along the firefighting in FPE? So
I'm not sure if I understand the question.
So I think what we're getting at is are there further subdivisions, or do you really have to know something about everything within fire protection?
Yeah, so you do have to know something about everything in fire protection. Unfortunately, since only about 200 people take the fire protection PE a year, there's no subdivision. I know that like mechanical and civil have a bunch of different variants of the PE exam, but fire protection is general. So if you're solely doing sprinkler design or solely doing fire alarm design, there are a lot of topics that you might have to try to learn in order to sit for the fire protection PE.
I think there's something for everyone to brush up on.
Yeah, of course.
That's at least how I felt, right? There's always an area each person feels is a little easier and areas that you need to remember.
Yeah, for sure.
What is the frequency for revalidation of your PE?
It depends on the state. Yeah, it depends on the state. I believe like New York is every 3 years, perhaps. I know that Massachusetts is every 2 years. Connecticut is every year, I think. So it certainly depends on the state.
So here's another one that's a little interesting. It's asking about comedy, and we really didn't talk a lot about it in this presentation, but once you get licensed somewhere, you know, filing for licensure is a little easier. It usually means you don't have to take a test. It usually means you still have to meet that specific state's requirements, along with appropriate paperwork and fees. So I know, Kevin, you mentioned Texas in your presentation, and I think that that's a really good example in the sense that I think that ethics exam has to be done even under just filing for reciprocity.
Yeah, I agree. That based on what I read through on the Texas state website, it was kind of like even if you're applying through comedy, you still have to have this Texas-specific ethics exam because that's not given in every state. So they want to make sure that you're an ethical engineer.
Right.
I found, so I applied for comedy, and I found that although it was a very long process, it was relatively simple. So it just took a long time. NCES has a very good setup for multi-state reciprocity, and essentially they hold all your information, and then when you're ready to apply to another state, you actually release that information to that other state. So I found it very simple in the fact that NCES helps you do a lot of that, but the thing that was difficult is that you have to get a certain number of references, and they have to fill out something on NCES. You have to get your schools to issue your transcripts on there, and you have to show kind of your work experience.
Yes. And there are actually some states, and through the NCAAS does an annual meeting and all the state licensure boards come together. And there's a few states right now that are actually looking at having open reciprocity.
Wow.
So it's always an interesting conversation to see where it's going, but right now it is each individual state. We did get someone who also asked about being a chartered engineer, so out in the UK, and would they be eligible to file for comedy here? I think you would. It's going to depend on the experience and which specific state you're looking at to see what types of information and materials that they would require. I can say I don't know of too many people who have tried or just gone on that path. So I don't have any firsthand knowledge of it, but I would think that it should work. Those processes are in place and completely recognized. There's some agreements between all of the licensure boards that are global, and I'm fairly certain the UK's been in most of them that I was looking at. I actually was recently looking at some of those. Does the FE exam still contain multiple engineering discipline questions, or is it all discipline specific now?
I don't have an answer for that. I don't know if you do, Vicki.
I have not looked a lot at the FE recently.
Yeah.
I guess the best advice is to check with NCAAS's website. They do have lots of FE information available there. Let's see. That one I just touched on. Somebody was asking about if they were moving to make licensure easier to file for reciprocity. Okay, let's see. I just want to make sure I didn't miss any. Somebody was asking about practice tests. So SFP has components of practice tests that are within our PE review program. NCAAS is offering a practice exam that you can purchase. And I'm sure that there are other sources out there. I know that there's a couple of other bodies that do review information as well. So they should be fairly accessible. And somebody was following up when we talked about reference manual, asking if you get it prior to the test. So yes, you log into My NCES, and there is a whole section for resources, and right in there would be the handbook. No, you do not have to be registered for the exam in order to access the reference handbook. I will tell you, it's different if you took the test under the other style, but considering current education platforms, I look at what's in an engineering class today, and that's different than when I took it too. So it's just different. It's not better or worse. It's just different. So somebody the question that just came in is anticipating changes to online testing and affecting the references and that they can't be brought in. You know, they get to study, they get to use it electronically. So, you know, there's pros and cons to everything. And the committee is just dedicated to trying to make sure we're still evaluating minimum competency. So that's what we're looking for. It's always a little nervous, not just for the candidates taking this exam, it's also nervous for the committee to know that we did it right and that it comes out. We have great guidance from NCEES. We are not the first exam to transition. And by 2024, all PE exams will be in a computer-based format. So let's see. I just want to see if I missed any. Oh, right on here, very timely, is that they would love to share this presentation with others. So how do you do that? Well, there's going to be a couple of ways. So immediately, just in our normal process of doing webinars, it's going to be posted to SFP's YouTube channel. So you'll be able to view it in that format. And then additionally, we are doing some updates to the SFP licensure page, and we're going to embed the video right in the page for those who are getting ready to take the exam or interested in knowing more of the details along the way. So it is absolutely available. You'll get the YouTube link as part of your closeout email that comes and be able to access it that way. And then not too much further down the road, you'll be seeing some updates to our licensure page and going that route. I think I have hit on all of the topics from our variety of questions.
Great.
Kevin, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to offer?
Nothing too major. Thanks everybody for joining in. I've provided my email. If you have questions for me, great. If we haven't answered your question today, your question probably lies with whatever state that you're trying to register with. So that might also be a good place to start, or with NCEES.
Yeah, and Kevin, since I still have a minute, I'm going to answer this last one that just popped in.
Yeah, sure.
Somebody was asking that they've got 20 years experience, and you know, if they need to take the FE, they'll do that. But do they need to have the 4 years after completing the FE? And the answer is no. So you need to have 4 years experience. If you've already done your experience and you go take the FE, as soon as you've passed that, you're allowed to sign up for the PE exam. So, you know, it's as long as your state boards have approved you. So it's not an additional time period there that you would have to wait. And just as a reminder, the fire protection exam is only once a year. So it's just based on the volume and demand. It's part of the typical business model. Some of the larger disciplines offer theirs any day that somebody wants to take them. Fire protection, we have on average about 200 people a year. There was a spike last year being the last administration of paper and pencil. So just to give that background. So with that, I'm going to say thanks to everybody, including Kevin. It was an outstanding presentation, and we appreciate your time and sharing your knowledge with us. And good luck to all of you who are preparing for exams in the near future.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Vicky.
everybody.